Is the Ukraine co- is the Ukraine war finally coming to an end? Well, not exactly. There hasn't exactly been progress, but there was a very monumental meeting today in the great state of Alaska between two presidents of very powerful nations, the United States President Donald J. Trump and the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Their talks regarded whether or not peace could be made in the Ukraine war. And today we're going to give you the details of that particular conversation. Welcome to the Watchdog. Oh, you guys are looking at my Rubik's Cube. I thought I had this already set up. My apologies. Man, two mistakes in a row to start this show. We're a professional operation, I swear to you. Shalom, my friends, and welcome to this episode of The Watchdog. I am your host, CJ Cox, here to tell you that we are indeed living in biblical times, and the times they are estranging, as I like to say, as in they are getting stranger and stranger, but also I'm not a comedian, so don't worry, you don't have to laugh. Let's go ahead and go through some of our channel housekeeping while we are here. If you are here, please remember to like and share this video. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so, and hit that bell to get notified every time that we go live. Be sure to leave any questions, comments, criticisms, concerns, critiques, anything of that nature in the comment section down below. We will, of course, try to answer all of your questions. If you are here and would like to contribute to the journalistic work that we do here, you can do so in various different ways. You can give a one-time donation through our PayPal. Link is in the description below. You can subscribe to our Patreon. This is a Watchdog-specific Patreon, by the by, in case you are a fan of the other channel. This one is specifically for the Synagogue News, not for the Synagogue, right? So please do consider giving there if you want to be a monthly contributor. And if you want something more tangible for your contribution, you can also buy my theology book, 15 Questions for Calvinists Answered. Of course, that is a theology book, not a politics book, but nevertheless, if it is something that you find interesting, and I certainly hope you do, then it is down there for your viewing pleasure, if indeed it would pleasure you to view it. Also have various social media platforms that you can follow me on. I am on Gab, Parler, Minds, MeWe, Telegram, Facebook, Twitter/X/Twix, whatever you'd like to call it, Truth Social, all at the tag The Synagogue. I believe there are links to those in the description, but I'm actually not 100% sure. Regardless, if you're on any of those websites, you can just look me up at the tag The Synagogue and you will be able to find me. If you are on any of those platforms, please do consider sharing this video to those platforms and sharing it with all your friends, family, co-congregants, anybody else who you think might be benefited by this content. But that aside, you can follow us on all of these different social media platforms, and I certainly appreciate anybody who is doing so. That's pretty much it as far as the regular channel housekeeping. Remember, this show is exclusively on the Synagogue News. Do recall, though, that we have a Rumble channel. Just in case any of our content gets taken down over here, you can watch us over on Rumble. The YouTube channel is called The Synagogue over on Rumble, not The Synagogue News. I was originally going to use it for my theology content. Unfortunately, it won't actually let me change the name unless I give them money, which at the moment I just don't have the money to give them. But nevertheless, please do consider following us on Rumble, where you can find all of our content. Big reason you really want to follow on Rumble, there's kind of two, right? Number one, it helps you to fight back against the social media overlords who are trying to run our lives, trying to censor our speech, trying to make sure conservative content, Christian content, historical content in some instances is all tossed to the wayside. We don't want any of that, right? We want to make sure that we're actually able to watch the things that we want to watch. So it does, incentivize YouTube to change its policies while also rewarding companies like Rumble who are actually operating in a pro free speech manner. So that's the first reason to follow us over there on Rumble. But the second reason to follow us there on Rumble is that it is entirely possible that we say something that will get this channel taken down or that will get this individual episode taken down. Not because we're trying to offend anybody, but unfortunately, as it turns out in the modern world, 2025, the year of our Lord, Christian and conservative content is controversial, and the latter, unfortunately, a little bit more than the former, but especially so when you combine the two, as we do. So, in the event that this video gets taken down, you'll be able to find it over there on Rumble. And in the event that this channel gets taken down, you'll be able to find all of our videos over there on Rumble. So please do consider subscribing to the Rumble account as well. Certainly appreciate anybody who is doing that. We always like to have a little bit of a channel housekeeping, or excuse me, of a this day in history. That's part of the channel housekeeping. Of a this day in history fun fact for you guys. And I'm not going to lie, there were a lot of different fun facts to choose from. It was kind of hard to choose today. But one of the ones that I thought was most interesting was that Pope Sixtus the Fourth, I believe it was, might have been sixth. I don't know if I'm getting it confused. It was either an IV or a VI. I'm fairly certain it was fourth. I was reading about it earlier today, and now I can't remember. But anyways, I believe it was Pope Sixtus IV consecrated the Sistine Chapel on this day, that is August the 15th, 1483. It is currently August the 15th, 2025. So that was 642 years ago. No, 542 years ago. My apologies. And yeah, Pope Sixtus IV consecrated the Sistine Chapel, which of course is one of the more beautiful buildings in all of Rome, but it's also kind of, for those of us who are Protestant, it's also kind of a symbol of not only papal power, which is not a very good thing, but also papal corruption, right? So on one end, it's this magnificent piece of architecture. You have that phenomenal art on the Sistine Chapel ceiling, painted, of course, originally by the great painter of the Renaissance era, Michelangelo, who I believe was like in his 20s when he painted that, if I do remember correctly. I don't know if I remember correctly, to be fair. But I think when he ended up painting that, he was in like his 20s. He was born a couple years after the consecration, but obviously he painted it after the building was already completed, right? So that makes sense. At any rate, it's like I said, it's this phenomenal achievement in terms of human ingenuity, in terms of human artistic talent, beautiful architecture. I've never seen it personally, but it's definitely on my short list of things that I would very much like to see if the Lord provides me the means to do so. And yet at the same time, it was built off of, from funding that was collected via indulgences and other such. You could call them illicit. I guess technically they're not illegal at the time, but nefarious means, right, to collect these different, to collect this money for this building. And it ends up being a symbol of papal power, papal authority, and papal corruption, which, of course, to those of us who take the gospel and Christianity seriously, is a little more than deeply offensive. Nevertheless, it was consecrated on this day. That is, again, August the 15th, but in 1483, we're in, obviously, 2025. And the first Mass, fun fact, was actually celebrated on the Feast of the Assumption. Now, I'm not 100% sure if that was the same day as it is today. Nowadays, the Feast of the Assumption is, I'm fairly certain, on November the 1st, but I could be wrong about that. Or at the very least, it was defined. The Fourth Marian Dogma was defined on November the 1st, 1950. So that's probably actually what I'm thinking of. Nevertheless, man, now I'm trying to remember. I'm going to look this up real quick. Yes. August the 15th is the Feast of the Assumption of Mary, which of course is not something that we as Christians celebrate, but the Catholics obviously do. So this was also consecrated on the Feast of the Assumption of Mary, because that date is today. So there you go. You got a little fun holiday fact about Catholic holidays and also a fun history fact. Hope that is a blessing to you guys. Or if it's not, then, whatever, I guess. It's my channel. I'm going to do what I want. Anyways, we have a very interesting bunch of topics to get to today. Our primary topic is going to be the recent Trump-Putin peace meeting in Alaska. But since we're going to be spending a majority of our time on that topic, I want to get to a couple of other things first. Not forced. Oh my goodness, Jay. I got very little sleep last night. I apologize, guys. And the first thing is there's been a story that has made the rounds again. Now, this story was originally published 5 years ago in the year 2020. But for whatever reason, the story has become popular yet again, and there's various accounts, especially on Twitter, but also on Facebook, that have been sharing this story. And it's a story regarding the murder of a child, a little baby, who survived a failed abortion attempt, which really is to say that the doctor failed at murdering this child when he was preborn, and then decided to murder the child after he had failed and it was already born. I say it because I can't remember off the top of my head if it was a boy or a girl. I believe the article is going to tell us. Nevertheless, it was an image bearer of God. It was a precious little angel. And this doctor, this murderer really, decided to violently kill this child because the child survived an attempt on the part of this doctor to violently kill this child. And I decided that we were going to read you guys the original story from LifeSite News today because I want everybody to know what our enemy looks like. I understand a lot of people who watch this channel are going to agree with me on this, but a lot of people who watch this channel won't. Okay? And we need to understand when it comes to the pro-life issue. Number one, this is not a compromise issue. No compromise. Okay? We are talking about the greatest injustice in the history of this entire nation. And look, I think America is the greatest country that's ever existed, but let's be honest, just like any other country in the world, it's not like we have a small amount of injustices to choose from. We can go to chattel slavery in the South pre-Civil War. We can go to Jim Crow. We can go to the massacres of Native Americans and various treaty violations. We can go to putting the Japanese people in internment camps in the 1940s. We can go to rejecting Jewish refugees who were fleeing Germany during the Holocaust. We can go to Buck v. Bell when the United States Supreme Court ruled that eugenics and forceful sterilization of undesirables was okay and constitutional. We can go to Coker v. Georgia when the United States Supreme Court decided it was unconstitutional to execute rapists. We can go to Kennedy v. Louisiana, 2008, where the United States Supreme Court, they're on this list a lot, decided that it was unconstitutional to execute child rapists specifically. There are a lot of different things that we could point to say, that's messed up, that's disgusting, that is a great injustice. Lord, please have mercy on us both in not destroying us for this completely and totally wicked thing, but also in allowing us space for repentance and the ability to repent, such that our nation will not only try to reconcile as much as possible, try to make it right as much as possible, but more importantly, turn away from that sin and glorify you, right? Lord, please give us that ability. And all of those things are terrible, terrible things. But in my personal opinion, and I really shouldn't say opinion because I think this is a fact, the most evil depraved, disgusting, wicked, vile, satanic blight on the history of this country and all other countries who support this. Although certain other countries have some pretty vile things, like, of course, Germany's Holocaust and stuff like that. I digress. The worst thing that we have on our record is the mass slaughter and dehumanization of the preborn, and even of those who are freshly born, even of the little babies outside of the womb, which said dehumanization is happening constantly, more and more and more and more as time goes on. I would remind everybody that in 2022, when red state Montana had a measure on their ballot to ban the killing, or excuse me, not to ban the killing, but rather to force doctors to provide care for babies born alive, including, meaning not exclusively, including in situations of failed abortion, right? In red Montana, that ballot measure failed. In red Montana, so-called conservative Christian individuals said, no, we do not want a law that forces doctors to take care of born alive babies. Now we're not even talking about preborn babies. Okay. In 2024, of course, we saw 10 different states put a constitutional amendment to protect abortion on their ballot. And I believe 6 of those states ended up passing that, including red states like North Carolina and Missouri. And another red state, Florida, only failed to get the constitutional amendment passed because, unlike the other states who have a threshold of 50%, if over 50% vote yay, then it wins, they have a threshold of 60%. And like 58% voted to enshrine abortion in their constitution. So it's a win in the sense that Florida will not be enshrining abortion into their abortion rights, quote unquote, into their constitution. It is a loss in that over half of the population of quote unquote red Florida decided that they wanted the right to murder the preborn enshrined in their constitution. And we are getting further and further and further into this absolutely depraved state where we just simply do not consider not only the preborn, but even the newborn to be human beings worthy of value. And I think that we need to understand just how evil our enemy is in this instance. There is no compromise on this matter. There is no yeah, but on this matter. There is no seeing the other side on this matter. Friends, the only thing that we can accept is the complete and total abolishment of human abortion. That is the only outcome that is acceptable. And our enemies are not merely those who care about a 13-year-old girl who got knocked up, are not merely those who care about girls and women who were sexually assaulted, are not merely those who care about threat to the mother's life. And I'm not even saying those are necessarily good reasons. Threat to the mother's life, obviously, if you have a choice to choose between saving one life and saving no lives, you save one life, right? My understanding is that those cases where you must choose are exceptionally rare. But as far as, rape and incest and having sex young, right? Those are not legitimate reasons to get an abortion, obviously. But let's be clear, the people who are on the other side of this issue don't actually care about those things. The people who are on the other side of this issue want legalized child sacrifice. And they use those circumstances to pull at your heartstrings to give an excuse for legalized child sacrifice. And I think the story that we're about to read shows that probably better than most other stories ever would. So I have titled this section, The True Face of the Pro-Choice Movement. Okay? Why is this not pulling up? Sorry. The true face of the pro-choice movement. There it is. The true face of the pro-choice movement. And I want to give a trigger warning Hate to use that term, but, viewer discretion advised. This story is not fun. Okay? Well, let's get into it. From LifeSite News, April 15th, 2020. Abortionist drowned a 34-week-old baby who survived abortion in a bucket of water. Abortionist drowned a 34-week-old baby who survived abortion in a bucket of water. Now, very briefly, I would like to note this did not take place in the United States of America. Doesn't really matter because those who are in the United States of America have made perfectly clear, see my previous Montana point, that they don't actually take issue with this kind of thing. The citizenry of this country has told us they don't mind if babies who are freshly born are murdered. They don't mind, or at the very least neglected to the point of death. So let's read. An abortionist in South Korea has been convicted of drowning a 34-week-old baby who survived a botched abortion. The horrific case shows the problem of late-term abortion and infanticide is a worldwide one. The Seoul, I don't know how you say this, sorry, Seoul Central District Court on Friday convicted the abortionist, identified only by his surname Yun, on Friday, and sentenced him to 3 years and 6 months in prison for killing the baby. The child reportedly burst out crying during the abortion procedure after surviving it. Here is more from the Korea Times. Quote, medical staff who participated in the operation have consistently said they heard the baby crying, a 3-judge panel of the court said in a statement. It is clear that the doctor killed the baby who was born alive. Yun, who ran a maternity clinic in Seoul, received 28 million won, or $23,000, for the operation from the mother of a pregnant girl, 16. Yun was later indicted on murder charges for putting the live baby in a bucket of water. And by the by, I think that at the very least, the mother should also be charged with a crime in this instance. The mother of the 16-year-old girl, I mean. I don't know enough about the 16-year-old girl's involvement. She is a minor, and it is entirely possible that she did not want this to take place or that she was coerced. But it's entirely possible, and I would even go as far as to say likely, that she should face criminal charges also. On the list of things which should be completely obvious, but for some reason are controversial, yes, we should punish mothers in instances of abortion. Absolutely. Absolutely. Anything else is injustice. The shocking story is an actual result of what an abortion facility staffer in the United States said her abortion clinic would do if a baby survived an abortion. As Life News reported, an undercover video showed an abortion clinic employee told a patient to flush or drown her baby who survives an abortion. And let's go ahead and click on this real quick, because this is actually on camera. You can see it for yourself. Abortion clinic staffer says she will drown a baby who survives abortion in a jar of solution. This one is in the United States. Again, this is old, 6 years old at this point, 2019. But this is in the United States of America. And the video was actually on here last time I was here. I don't know why. It's just a still picture at this point. Is this it?
What if it was like twitching or like something like that? Like
the solution will make it stop.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not gonna be moving around in the jar.
Okay, the solution would make it like
Yeah, that's the whole purpose of the solution.
okay. So like if it looked like it was like breathing or something like that,
It'll automatically stop. It won't be able to.
it won't be okay.
Not with the
So I'm not even gonna see it.
No.
So okay. So I mean, like if that
You're
happens,
asleep, they take it out and it goes into our lab where they do the stuff with the jar and cleaning and all that.
okay. So what is the solution? It's just like something like toxic or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have.
And we don't need to watch the entire thing. You get the idea. Okay, so yes, this did take place in South Korea. It is something that takes place in the United States as well. Okay. abortion clinic employees are quite clear that they're perfectly fine with killing born alive babies after botched abortions. And again, remember, born alive bills were suggested to the people, were brought to a vote, and failed not only in blue, but in red states all across the country in 2022. I always pick on Montana because Montana is supposed to be like Wagyu steak raw kind of red. You know what I mean? But apparently, even though they are amongst the reddest of red states, Montana thinks it's perfectly fine. The people of Montana think it's perfectly fine to kill a baby who was born alive during a botched abortion. And not even just during a botched abortion, because remember, the language of the law, the language of the bill, the proposed bill said, including in cases of botched abortion, meaning that this law was going to force doctors to provide medical care for babies born alive, but especially in cases of botched abortion. Meaning not just in cases of botched abortion. Meaning the people of Montana not only want it to be legal to murder a born alive baby after a botched abortion, they want it to be legal to neglect to the point of death a born alive baby, period. In red state, super conservative, super Christian Montana. Allegedly. You can put heavy air quotes around conservative, red state, and Christian, because that's some of the most disgusting and vile shit I've ever heard. Excuse my French. So we have the population of this nation and the politicians in this nation saying that they're okay with this in mass. People say, oh, well, you know, the American people are against late-term abortion. No, they're not. No, they're not. No, they're not, because when they have a chance to make it illegal, they don't. When they have a chance to ban the murder of born alive babies, they don't. When information comes to light, like what this woman said to this other young woman, this undercover reporter, about we'll just drown it in a jar of solution if it's born alive. When this information comes to light and the people have an opportunity to do something about it, guess what? They don't. Because they don't care. And it's not mere apathy. It's desire. They want it to be legal. People are so consistently hung up on, well, the media and all the brainwashing and the propaganda and the schools. And look, I'm not saying that the schools are good and okay. Take your children out of schools. Teach them privately, whether that be in a homeschool or in a private community school or some kind of a Christian school. I don't care. Teach them privately in a conservative environment, okay? Not saying that the schools aren't somewhat to blame. And I'm not saying that the media isn't somewhat to blame. Turn off CNN, turn off MSNBC, get your news from trustworthy sources, hopefully the Watchdog, but if you guys don't like this particular source, there are plenty of other trustworthy sources out there. And I'm not saying entertainment doesn't have some sort of a play in this. Don't let your little girls listen to Cardi B. Don't let your sons listen to Lil Wayne. Don't yourselves listen to this music that degrades human life, that degrades women as sexual objects, that says it's cool and fine to kill people and take hardcore drugs and use women like tools and stuff of that nature. Not saying that that isn't somewhat to blame. All of these things are factors, but you know what is the biggest factor that nobody wants to address is that the citizenry of the United States is evil. They are evil. And it's not just the United States, the citizenry of Canada is evil. The citizenry of the United Kingdom is evil. The citizenry of Ireland is evil. The citizenry of Mexico is evil. The citizenry of the vast majority of this world is a citizenry that is evil, is a citizenry that does not care whether these newborns live or die, or even worse, these preborns live or die. They don't care. Their hearts are wicked. What does the prophet Jeremiah say? The heart is wicked above all else, desperately deceitful. Who can know it? I believe that's a direct quotation. It might be a paraphrase. And yes, South Korea did, at this particular point in time, prosecute this doctor. Good for them. I hope he is executed, genuinely. I genuinely think, I'm so pro-death penalty, it's ridiculous, guys. I mean, I'm dancing on the way to chopping the heads off of these people. That's a little harsh. We should never, even when we execute a vile criminal, we should never actually rejoice in their death. I just get very angry, so I apologize for that. But absolutely, this man should be executed. I doubt he was. Regardless, at least he was found guilty. That's a positive thing. But here in our own nation, when we have the opportunity to stop things like this, we don't. We don't. We don't care to stop things like this. Born alive bills fail. Heartbeat bills fail. We want to talk about abolishing abortion, and I agree. We need to completely and utterly eradicate this vile practice. But we can't even get a born alive bill passed. Why can't we even get a born alive bill passed? Well, because the citizens of this country, whether they vote red or blue, whether they're in the pews or not, whether they're MAGA or Ron Paul Revolution or Bernie Sanders socialists, doesn't matter. The citizens of this country are okay with it. In fact, they want it. Don't buy into the propaganda that it's still morning in America, because it is not. It is rapidly approaching midnight unless we have serious revival in this country. And that's just the truth of it. I'm not going to finish this article because you already get the point. There's no need for us to go through all the details. But we need repentance, reformation, and revival in this country, because we have a vile population, we have a vile ruling class, and we have a vile list of crimes that if and when the Lord decides to stop showing us mercy, he will make us pay for brutally, my friends, and he'll be just in doing so. He'll be perfectly just in doing so. In fact, if we don't repent and he didn't do so, he would be unjust. Our primary story for today is the Trump-Putin summit. And we have a couple different articles we are going to want to read about this Trump-Putin summit. For those who do not know, President Vladimir Putin of Russia and President Donald J. Trump of the United States of America met in the great state of Alaska to discuss a potential peace deal as it pertains to Ukraine. And what we're going to get into is a little bit of what actually took place there. Now, this meeting just took place today. That is August the 15th, 2025. So this is still a developing story. Okay. However, we're going to at least share with you what information we can get. And our first article that we'll be reading today is from The Hill. 5 takeaways from the Trump-Putin summit. Bear in mind that The Hill is a notably left-wing paper, but I digress. President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin left the world guessing on Friday after a historic summit that yielded no details about what was discussed, what was agreed to, and what remaining sticking points remain to ending the war with Ukraine. That was a terribly worded sentence. What remaining sticking points remain? Anyways, the two leaders holed up behind closed doors for around 3 hours at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in Anchorage, Alaska. What they talked about, however, remains largely a mystery, as the two leaders standing side by side at a joint news conference revealed very little of what progress they said was made. They took no questions from the press. Here are 5 takeaways from the summit. Takeaway number 1, no deal on ceasefire, though allegedly progress was made. Trump at the press conference would only tease the fact that the two leaders had a productive meeting and said that they agreed on some things but not others without offering any details as to what was discussed. Quote, I believe we had a very productive meeting. There were many, many points that we agreed on. Most of them, I would say, a couple of big ones that we haven't quite gotten there. But we've made some headway. So there's no deal until there's a deal, end quote, Trump said, adding that he would be calling European leaders and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky following the summit, which of course makes sense. Obviously, you can't make peace with only one of the two parties. It's ultimately, up to them, Trump said. Putin, for his part, stressed that his nation needs to eliminate what he called the primary roots of the conflict without elaborating on what those were. He acknowledged that some agreement was made, but also did not offer any details. Quote, I would like to hope that the agreement that we've reached together will help us bring closer the goal and will pave the path towards peace in Ukraine, end quote, Putin said. Quote, we expect that Kiev and European capitals will perceive that constructively and that they won't throw a wrench in the works. They will not make any attempts to use some backroom dealings to conduct provocations to torpedo the nascent progress, end quote. So, no deal so far, but allegedly there has been some progress, and we are going to see Trump calling Zelensky here soon to try and push that progress further, to progress even further than what we've gotten at so far. Real quickly, I'd like to give you the President C.J. Cox plan for peace. The first thing is that I just wouldn't want to be involved in any way other than being an arbiter, at least at first. One could certainly make an argument that perhaps it is in the United States' best interest to be involved on the side of Ukraine. I, so far, remain unconvinced. I am not saying that Vladimir Putin is not in the wrong. I think he is. However, I also don't think that it's my business as a nation to get involved every single time a country is in the wrong. I currently think that the Burmese government is in the wrong in the way that it's persecuting Burmese citizens, or Myanmar citizens, if you want to use that name. And yet we're not involved there, and we shouldn't be, right? I don't think that the Azerbaijani government had a right to destroy the what is it called? Narbak? I can't remember. It's an Armenian enclave in disputed territory in between Azerbaijan and Armenia. They destroyed it a couple years ago, right? And have threatened to invade Armenia ever since. I don't think that was okay. We obviously didn't get involved, right? And we shouldn't have. Obviously, there's one could have very strong opinions about the whole Yemeni situation, or what's going on in Sudan, or what's going on in Ethiopia. The Haiti situation might be a little bit different, only because it's on our doorstep. Perhaps for our own national security interest, we should be getting involved in Haiti. The fact of the matter is, Haitian refugees will flee to the nearest stable nation, and that is America. So if we don't want to have to deal with a refugee crisis, it does behoove us to create a peaceful situation in a country like Haiti. But notice that actually benefits our national interests, right? Not all situations are created the same. And I think for the most part, that should be how all nations operate as it pertains to foreign policy. Now, there can be exceptions to this. Obviously, if you have an alliance with a nation, right, like NATO is a military alliance. If Russia were to attack Great Britain, then it behooves us, for the perspective of honesty and keeping our word, to defend Great Britain just as we expect them to defend us. That's part of the whole point of having a NATO, right? So there are exceptions to some of these rules, but for the most part, nations should not be getting involved every time rogue nations or rogue terrorist groups go after their own people, somebody else's people, etc. It's not our job to police the world, okay? That being said, I do think America, being the great superpower that it is, has unique opportunities to create peace in situations like what we have going on in Ukraine. My personal proposal would not make anybody happy, but I think it would end the conflict. I think if we could get Zelensky to agree to cede Crimea and the Donbass region. Cede those to Russia. Those are officially recognized as Russian territory. They conquered it. They control it. It's theirs now. And they got a predominantly Russian population in both those areas anyhow. Okay. That would give Putin a reason to come to the table. Hey, you get to keep the Donbass region. You get to keep Crimea. And I'd even sweeten the pot a little bit more by saying, look, you're not as evil as everybody thinks. You are not a good person. Putin's a dictator, no doubt. But he's not the second coming of Saddam Hussein or Adolf Hitler. Okay. So we, the United States, are willing to drop embargoes on you and actually do deals with you, economic deals with you, if you come to the table. So we got a pretty sweet pot over here. You get to keep Donbass, you get to keep Crimea, and we are willing to recognize the Putin regime as a legitimate regime and to trade with you guys. Both of our economies will benefit from this, but especially yours, because let's be perfectly honest, mine's going to be fine regardless. And then turn to Ukraine and say, but you get to join NATO. And why would we do this? Well, Putin gets legitimacy in the eyes of the world. Putin's economy gets strengthened, which gives him a reason to stay in power as it stands right now. A lot of Russians like him, but the more Russians die and the more the economy tanks, the less Russians like him, right? So it gives him legitimacy. It gives him a reason to stay in power, and it gives him the ability to go back to the Russian people and claim victory. Hey, we got Crimea. We got the Donbass. We squashed this border beef between NATO and Russia, right? But Ukraine, on the other hand, gets to join NATO, which is the whole thing that they wanted in the first place that caused this entire fight. And more importantly, in joining NATO, they have protection against future Russian aggression. Because if somebody thinks, well, what who's to say that Putin doesn't pull an Adolf Hitler and say, okay, well, you appeased me by giving me Austria and the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia and stuff like that. I'm just going to move further. Well, now we actually have a treaty with Ukraine, and if you invade Ukraine a second time, then we're going to nuke the hell out of you. Right? Or at the very least, even if we do fight a conventional war, it's the entire European continent, plus Canada, plus Turkey, plus the United States against you. Good luck. And by the way, some of your allies, Iran and, Iran, you basically just left Iran at the altar after we bombed Iran. China doesn't trust you worth a lick. And North Korea is pathetic. So good luck. Right? I think both sides would be a little irritated with that proposal. But I think it would work. I think it would get both sides to come to the table. I think both sides would win enough that they might be agreeable to it. I think it would end the war. And I think it would prevent future wars. Because it alleviates a lot of the fears Putin has in that his regime is seen as legitimate and we're not perceived as an active threat to him. And it would alleviate a lot of the fears Ukraine has in that you now have it in writing, not just that we will support your war effort, but that we'll actually put boots on the ground, and not just us, but all the other European nations will put boots on the ground if Russia decides to mess with you again. That would be my personal proposal. And if both sides rejected it, I'd be like, that's fine. Y'all have fun. I'm not a part of this anymore. I was playing Peacemaker. You didn't want me to play Peacemaker. I got my own problems to worry about in the United States. I'm interested to know what you guys think about that. Let me know in the comment section down below. Nevertheless, back to the article. Vague progress that we don't actually have any insight in was apparently made, but there's no treaty or no deal. And Trump is going to be speaking with Zelensky here in the near future. Second takeaway, Trump gives Putin red carpet treatment. Trump rolled out the red carpet literally for Putin's arrival in the U.S. Air Force One arrived at the base first, with Putin's presidential plane arriving about half an hour later. Both leaders emerged at the same time, walking down a red carpet and greeting each other warmly. Trump applauded while the Russian president walked to meet him, shaking hands and giving friendly arm taps while the two exchanged pleasantries before posing for photos. Putin later said at the press conference that he greeted Trump by saying, "Good afternoon, dear neighbor." In a remarkable move, Putin stepped into Trump's armored presidential limousine, known as the Beast, and rode with Trump to the site of the summit at the base. Putin was seen laughing with Trump in the back seat as the motorcade drove away from the tarmac. Which I don't actually think this particular point is a big deal. In fact, I actually think this is beneficial. I think that President Trump, there's this old saying, you catch more bees with honey than vinegar, right? I think President Trump actually is wise in understanding if I want to make a deal with somebody, well, then I'm obviously not going to what's the word I'm looking for here? Try and weigh on them tremendously. There's a word I'm looking for, but for some reason it's fleeting me. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? If you want to make a deal, obviously you have the power to be a little bit abrasive, but you don't want to be too abrasive. You don't want to make an enemy out of Putin, right? So I don't actually think this. I actually think this is wise on Trump's part. Scrolling down. Takeaway number 3 is that much remains a mystery, which we already kind of discussed, so we'll skip over this portion of the article. Not a lot has actually been spoken. Takeaway number 4, carefully choreographed around peace. Friday's meeting was carefully choreographed to bolster Trump's image as a peacemaker. Both the backdrop of the meeting and the press conference were emblazoned with the words, "pursuing peace." The White House this week touted Nobel Peace Prize endorsements from various world leaders, including the heads of state from Israel, Cambodia, Pakistan, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, all of whom were involved in conflicts that Trump helped end. However, Trump has been unable to halt the war in Ukraine or 2 of the world's other major wars, Israel's war with Hamas in Gaza, where mass starvation is taking hold, or the brutal civil war in Sudan, which I would just note very briefly, nobody's even talking about. And there is a vicious civil war going on in Sudan. It definitely needs to end. Pray for peace in Sudan. However, Trump has been, I just read that. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton on Friday said she'd nominate Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize if he managed to broker peace in Ukraine without giving Russia Ukrainian territory, which actually, to be fair, good on her for putting partisan politics aside. I don't know if it's possible without ceding some Ukrainian territory. You guys just heard my own proposal. But nevertheless, big on her. So there you go. Trump insisted the meeting went well, despite having nothing to show for it. Christina Hook, an assistant professor of conflict management at Kennesaw State University, said Trump's approach to Putin doesn't appear to be working. Quote, Trump's talk of progress seems aimed at generating momentum, but the fundamental obstacle remains. Putin refuses to recognize Ukraine's sovereignty or its people's democratic right to choose their future. Until that changes, diplomacy is largely theater, end quote, she said. And part of the reason for this is because, I don't know this for a fact, because so many of the details are just not shared with us. But I wonder what exactly Trump is giving Putin, because you kind of need 2 things with this. You notice with that, and I'm not a foreign policy expert, right? But one thing you'll notice with the proposal I laid out just a second ago is on one end you have a juicy honeypot, right? Something that really, look, Putin, I can give you legitimacy to your regime. Right now, you are considered a rogue state. People don't consider you legitimate. I can give you that. And I can give you some territory so that you can go back to your fan base and say, hey, look, we won. And I can give you some major economic benefit in that I can release you from these embargoes and treat you like a trade partner rather than like an enemy, right? But there's a little bit of an anvil on the other side too, which is, look, I don't have to get involved with Ukraine in order to just simply not get in anyone's way when they get involved. I can continue to fund Ukraine if I want. In fact, I can even fund them more if I want. I can continue to embargo you. Your economy is not doing well. And I can even skirt around you. I'm not above making a deal with some of your allies. Iran, for example. If it puts the pressure on Putin, maybe I do make a deal with Iran. Who's to say? And whether or not you're actually going to go through with that, the point is that there's that fear. There's the honeypot on one side, and there's the hammer on the other. And you're not leaning into the honeypot so strongly that it looks like you're capitulating, nor are you leaning into the anvil so strongly that it looks like you're making an enemy of Putin. You're just simply providing, look, there's a choice here. There's a choice that greatly benefits Russia and Vladimir Putin personally. And there's a choice that weakens Russia, destroys Putin's legacy, or continues to destroy Putin's legacy, because he's doing a pretty good job of doing that himself. And is ultimately negative for all parties involved. There's more death, there's more economic decay, and there's more evisceration of your own legacy, Mr. Putin. And we haven't really heard anything on either side. What is Trump willing to offer Putin that would encourage him to do this? And what is Trump willing to hold against Putin in the event that he doesn't sign a deal? And ditto, by the way, for Zelensky, right? What are we willing to offer Zelensky that would incentivize him to sign a deal? And what are we willing to use against Zelensky that would make it so it is against his best interest to not come to the table, right? I think both of those are important, and we haven't heard either side of the coin as it pertains to Putin. We have heard either side of the coin as it pertains to Zelensky, which is part of the reason why a lot of people tend to think that Trump is more pro-Putin than pro-Zelensky, because it does appear like Trump is perfectly willing to put the pressure on Zelensky. It doesn't appear like he's willing to put any pressure on Putin. I just don't think you can make peace that way personally. But again, I'm not a foreign policy expert. So, like I said, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Takeaway number 5, Trump's call to Zelensky and world leaders. Trump said he planned to call Zelensky and NATO allies following the meeting, adding that he also expected to speak again to Putin soon. Robert Murrett, deputy director of Syracuse University Institute for Security Policy and Law, said he was very encouraged by Trump's commitment to keep allies, in the loop. And he said the outcome would not come as a surprise in Europe, which is a good thing. Quote, they had no anticipation for a dramatic step forward, a ceasefire, any kind of thing, halfway to a peace agreement, he said. I think this is kind of the outcome that most of them expected, which one thing I do wish would happen is that they would at least have a ceasefire up until peace negotiations stopped. In other words, let's have a ceasefire, have negotiations. If negotiations fail, all right, the ceasefire's done, right? But while we're having negotiations, let's have a ceasefire. Plus, trying to give both sides a little bit of time to breathe, right? There was no immediate reaction from Zelensky or European leaders. On Friday night following the summit, Trump and Putin briefly discussed the location of their next meeting at the end of the joint press conference. Next time in Moscow, Trump said in English, chuckling. Putin said in English, chuckling. Oh, that's an interesting one, Trump said. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I could see it possibly happening, end quote. So those are some of the key takeaways from the Putin-Trump meeting. But we got another article that I want to read regarding the Trump-Putin meeting. And before we get to this other article, guys, please remember to like and share this video. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so. Hit the bell to get notified every time we go live. And remember to leave questions, comments, criticisms, and concerns in the comment section down below. All right, this is from NPR. Trump and Putin conclude talks on Ukraine, touting progress, but no breakthrough. Some of this is just going to be repetition, but of course, 2 or 3 witnesses kind of thing. President Trump and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin touted progress toward ending Russia's war in Ukraine on Friday, but they did not announce any steps to reach a ceasefire after their high-stakes summit. Trump said the two leaders made some headway during several hours of talks, but told reporters that there was no deal until there's a deal. Which, by the way, speaking of things like headway, that's another thing I think. Again, no foreign policy expert, but I think were I to be the president and propose the plan I laid out for you guys, provided that I had other foreign policy guys telling me, look, this could work. I don't think I'd budge. I don't think I'd negotiate. I'd be like, no, this is the plan. This is the deal. Okay, this deal, I am giving both of you guys significant amounts of honey. I am putting on both of you guys significant amounts of pressure. Okay. That's the deal. That's the deal. That's the only deal. If you're not going to make that deal, then, we'll see. We'll just have to see what happens. Like I said, maybe I circumvent Putin and make deals with his allies to make sure he doesn't have any. Maybe if Zelensky's the one who doesn't want to go, maybe I don't fund Zelensky. I don't know. Who knows? Right? Who knows what I'll do? But I might do something. So it's good. It's best for you to sign the deal. Right? Trump said there was a few sticking points to resolve, though he gave no details about what they were. Quote, some are not that significant. One is probably the most significant, he said. We have a very good chance of getting there. We didn't get there today, end quote. He said his next steps would be reaching out to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, as well as NATO and European leaders. In an interview with Fox News, Sean Hannity after the summit, Trump said that he would urge Zelensky to make the deal and said he hopes for a follow-up meeting between the Russian and Ukrainian leaders. And by the way, that would very much benefit Zelensky at this point as well, because a little fun fact that a lot of people don't know, Zelensky is a little bit of a dictator himself. Not quite to the level of Putin. There's levels to being a dictator. Like, Putin's obviously not as bad as somebody like Saddam Hussein or Kim Jong-un, but Zelensky's not as bad as somebody like Putin, and Biden is not as bad as somebody like Zelensky, right? There's levels to this. But Zelensky has arrested a lot of his political opponents recently, as of this year. Zelensky has gone against his people's wishes in postponing, shall we say, elections. Zelensky has gone against his people's wishes in continuing a victory at all costs mentality, which that one is even understandable. Maybe the Ukrainian people should desire victory at all costs, but of course, who are we to say? We're sitting here living in a pretty posh environment in the United States. All things considered, there aren't bombs going off in the streets here, so who are we to say one way or the other? But Zelensky, the war right now is tanking Zelensky's legacy as well and his reputation at home. So I think it would behoove him as well to make a deal. But I digress. Quote, now it's really up to President Zelensky to get it done, end quote, Trump said. Quote, and I would also say the European nations, they have to get involved a little bit, end quote. The summit started with a dramatic entrance. The two leaders flew into Joint Base Ellendorf-Richardson, met each other on a red carpet with U.S. fighter jets flying overhead. After a few hours of talks, they gave statements in front of a banner reading, pursuing peace, but they did not take questions from reporters. Putin spoke first, referencing an agreement, but providing no details. He said he was sincerely interested in ending his war with Ukraine, but to settle conflict, Putin said the primary roots of the conflict and the legitimate concerns of Russia had to be considered. Controversy here, but I actually do think there are legitimate concerns for Putin. He does have legitimate concerns. He has legitimate concerns with Ukraine wanting to join NATO, which it may seem bizarre for me to grant that while also saying that would be part of my peace deal. But I get it. I get it. Part of the reason why he has that concern is because as it stands right now, NATO essentially operates as an anti-Putin organization, right? And he has reason to be worried about NATO weaponry on his border. He also, of course, has this idea that Ukraine is not a legitimate nation. And while I don't agree with that, the Ukrainian people are certainly distinct enough from the Russian people that they constitute their own nation. One does see his point in that Ukrainian territory was Russian territory throughout most of history. It was Russian territory during the Tsardom. It was Russian territory during the Soviet Union's reign. So one can certainly understand the irredentist mentality Vladimir Putin has, even though, again, I don't agree with it. I think the Ukrainian people at this point in history are certainly, they have their own language, they have their own unique culture, they have their own Orthodox Church even, you know what I mean? They are certainly their own nation I think. So how would we best address those? Putin says those legitimate concerns need to be addressed, and I'm even granting, hey, I think they could be legitimate concerns. Well, first of all, it needs to be granted that Ukraine also has legitimate concerns. We're in a weird spiraling moment, right, where Ukraine wants to join NATO to protect itself from Russia, but Russia wants to attack Ukraine to protect itself from NATO, and you're just going in a circle. So how do you break the circle is really the question. I suspect that legitimizing the Putin regime and doing economic deals with the Putin regime such that they're no longer being embargoed, it's no longer a pariah state. Maybe we're not allies or even friendly, but we're on speaking terms. You know what I mean? I think that could go a long way in pacifying Putin's concerns. That there might be a threat on his doorstep. And at the same time, I think giving Ukraine that benefit or that piece of paper that says we will defend you next time this takes place, and not just us but all of Europe, I think that pacifies some of their fears. It's tense, but on one end, Ukraine has backing, and on the other end, Putin is starting to be seen as a legitimate ruler, as a legitimate president, right? We're taking him out of the enemy circle, and at the very least putting him into the co-belligerent circle, maybe acquaintance circle. Co-belligerent in the case that something took place where we had to fight somebody, like China, for example, who does not like Russia. Really would behoove Putin to be friendly with us over and against China, but he's yet to realize that that's in his best interest. I don't know. Again, I'm not a foreign policy expert. Maybe this is all incredibly stupid. Somebody let me know in the comments. But I think that could go a long way in pacifying the fears of both, to be honest. Pressing forward, we got to scroll down a little bit, actually. Quote, I would like to hope that the agreement that we've reached together will help us bring closer. Hang on one second. Let me redo this. Quote, I would like to hope that the agreement that we've reached together will help us bring closer to that goal and will pave the path towards peace in Ukraine, end quote, Putin said through an interpreter. Quote, we expect that Kiev and European capitals will perceive that constructively and that they won't throw a wrench in the works, end quote. Trump said Putin had presented him with a book showing thousands of prisoners that would be released in the event of a deal with Ukraine, and another book of pictures of people killed in the war. Trump this week had warned of severe consequences for Putin if progress was not made on ending the war. Now that's good. He didn't specify what exactly they were, but that is good. You got to, like I said, you need the honeypot and the pressure. But did not reference sanctions during his brief remarks. Afterward, he told Fox News, quote, I may have to think about it in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or something, but we don't have to think about that right now, end quote. Trump told Hannity he was pleased with Putin's comment that he would not have invaded Ukraine if Trump had been president instead of Joe Biden, a remark that echoed something Trump himself often says when he criticizes his predecessor. Trump has rated the meeting overall as a 10 out of 10 because it showed the two superpowers getting along. One superpower, let's be clear, Russia is not a superpower, and we need to not treat them like a superpower. They need to understand that we're the superpower because that's part of where we get our legitimacy from. That's part of where we get our ability to say, we can give you the honeypot and we can put on you the pressure because we're the superpower. You're not, right? That's why we can benefit you so much, and that's why we can put so much pain on you if we decide to do so. At any rate, when Trump concluded his remarks, he told Putin, we'll speak, quote, we'll speak to you very soon, end quote. Putin responded, speaking in English, next time in Moscow. So that's really the details that we have from the meeting. So far, it seems like, at least in the public eye, it seems like a lot of nothing. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is a lot of nothing. It's entirely possible, and I even think very likely, that some real progress was made during the summit. It's possible that this is pushing us closer to peacetime in Ukraine and Russia, which would be good. We want to stop bloodshed, of course, right? It also saves the United States a heck of a lot of money, so that's a good thing. And, you know, it stops some of the more stupid things that are going on. Like, Volodymyr Zelensky is not capable, I think, of running a dictatorship. Okay, he needs to be he ran on an anti-corruption platform, right? If he's going to arrest his political opponents and call off the elections, his legacy will be destroyed. And on the flip side, I mean, I was recently talking with a couple of friends of mine about how the International Judo Federation revoked Vladimir Putin's black belt, which is really stupid. Like, what is he going to do? Unlearn judo? That's ridiculous. But it's just an example of like Putin's legacy going down the tubes because of this war, right? So it could end a lot of that stupidity that goes around for both sides. I think peace would ultimately be a good thing. Like I said, you guys have heard what I think would be the best proposal, and I am genuinely interested in what you guys think about that proposal. No fooling, I want to know. Quick little rapid fire round, if you will. A couple things I want to talk about here. Pope Leo XIV has named Saint John Henry Newman a Doctor of the Church. This took place on July 31st, recognizing the lasting impact the 19th century converts' writings on conscience and the development of doctrine have laid on the Catholic Church. Now, for those of you who do not know, Newman was an influential member in England's Oxford movement, which really attempted to Catholicize the Anglican Church. Now, to be fair, not all Anglo-Catholics are. Some Anglo-Catholics are more Protestant, but just kind of want to take a middle road, right? And some Anglo-Catholics are Catholics who, for some reason, are not willing to leave the Anglican Church, like Calvin Robinson, for example. I'd put James Gadd in the latter half, or in the former half, rather. Just to give you an example of either, right? James Gadd is an Anglo-Catholic who I think is still, generally speaking, Protestant. Calvin Robinson is an Anglo-Catholic who, for all intents and purposes, is a Catholic without the Pope, right? And John Henry Newman was a prominent member of that Oxford movement before himself eventually converting to Roman Catholicism and becoming a cardinal, right? Now, Newman's greatest contribution to the church was this development hypothesis, where essentially he said that while it is not true, as the Catholic Church has historically claimed, that the various doctrines that the Catholic Church teaches today were taught by the apostles, Newman said that it is true that these doctrines were taught in a seed form, and that seed simply blossomed into a tree as time went on, right? Now, while this is a convenient excuse, you can get away with anything by saying, well, it developed over time. It's kind of a double-edged sword, because on the other end, it completely, as James White has said numerous times, abandons the historical field of battle. It's essentially the Roman Catholic Church agreeing, yeah, actually, the Marian dogmas weren't taught by the apostles. Maybe they were taught in seed form, and that allows apologists to kind of skirt across the objections and say, well, it's all development, bro. Just put some Newman on it. But unfortunately for those same apologists, the thing that draws people to either the Catholic or Orthodox churches is the claim to an ancient apostolic tradition, which they concede by way of Newman they don't actually have, right? Why is that all relevant here? Well, because that contribution specifically was named in the quote I just read to you as part of the reason why Pope Leo XIV is naming Cardinal Newman a doctor of the church, or somebody who has made significant contributions to the Catholic Church and to the development of Catholic theology. For an example of other doctors of the church, you have guys like Augustine and Thomas Aquinas and so on and so forth, right? Well, this gives us a little bit of insight as to what kind of a Pope Leo XIV is going to be. While the Trent Horns and the Joe Heschmeyers of the world are concerned with defending the quote-unquote apostolic tradition and the ancient roots of Catholicism, the Catholic Church itself is freely granting that the historical field of battle is lost and is conceding to Protestants and Orthodox that this was developed, that these doctrines were developments over time. Why is that relevant? Well, because we already know that Leo's primary concern, he said so himself during the first week of his pontificate, his primary concern is ecumenism. And we know that Francis's primary concern was also ecumenism. The Franciscan Revolution, ladies and gentlemen, is still in full effect. I know a lot of people think because Leo XIV in his past has been more moderate on various social issues and theological issues than Francis was back in his Bergoglian days. A lot of people thought because of that fact that Leo might be able to heal the rift between progressives and traditionalists in the Catholic Church and steer the church a little bit further or closer to the middle ground, if not actually the right. And I think the first one is true. I think it is possible that Leo does a good job massaging the concerns of the traditionalists in such a way that the Franciscan reforms actually become accepted by the traditionalists. Because this kind of thing has happened before, right? Traditionalists get all up in arms about something. They're usually right about that something, but some pope comes along who is not quite as radical as the previous pope, but nevertheless does a really good job of pacifying the concerns of the traditionalists. And then 50 years down the road, it turns out that the reformer pope, who was a little bit more extreme, won, right? And Leo's playing that role here yet again. And in naming Newman a doctor of the church, he is on one end pacifying the traditionalists by naming a very well-respected Catholic doctor of the church, while on the other end kind of conceding to all these different people, hey, there's some wiggle room here in what is surely a bid to make the Catholic Church seem less adversarial, both to Protestantism and to Orthodoxism, if you would call it that. So I think this is a huge development, personally. We'll talk about this on the other channel a little bit more in detail, because this is more of a socio-political channel, of course. But as it pertains to our purposes, we know that the Catholic Church, since September of 2014, has desired to establish a United Nations type organization for faiths. We know that guided Pope Francis in virtually everything that he did. And we know that Leo has said ecumenism and unity in the church is his primary concern. Is making Cardinal John Henry Newman, a doctor of the church, a step in that direction? I think the answer is obviously yes. This is obviously a step in the ecumenical direction. This is obviously a step in the direction of establishing a United Nations for religions. And I think a lot of people think that we're out of the Franciscan woodwork, whether they be Catholic or Protestant. They think, hey, that's a time that's behind us. It's not. It's not. Leo is not going to be as radical as Francis, I think, because that's not how you massage the concerns of the other side. However, he is trying to bake the Franciscan reforms into the very fabric of the Catholic Church by pacifying the traditionalists. And I think this is a perfect example of that. The next thing I wanted to mention here real quick, in Gaza, Hamas is squashing, Palestinian opposition, both to their party and to their war effort. Okay. There is a movement in Gaza to get rid of Hamas and to end this war with Israel. And Hamas, going against the wishes of its own people, is deciding not to allow those people the time of day. And that is kind of interesting, isn't it? Very interesting. Very interesting that we are actually seeing a change of disposition in the Gazan citizens. Of course, that's partially because they've just been beaten to a pulp. I understand that. Maybe don't start wars you can't finish. But to give you a quote here, Israeli forces have largely subdued Hamas, which now clings to a mere handful of weapons, primarily to instill fear among civilians and quash dissent. End quote. Yeah. This comes from Ibrahim Ahmed, who is a local, what is he? Let's see. A local shopkeep in Gaza. He also added that the Palestinian Authority appears increasingly irrelevant while armed groups like Abu Shabaab navigate freely within Israeli-controlled territories and avoid conflict with Israeli forces. This dynamic suggests Israel may turn to these clans during a potential period of military governance, positioning them as a counterbalance to both Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, end quote, which, for the record, I think would be a very bad idea. I think it would be best for Israel to annex the Gaza Strip, but whether or not that happens, of course, we shall see. I just found this to be incredibly interesting because it demonstrates that maybe we're not getting every side, right? Maybe it is that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not as bad as people think. Maybe Hamas actually is trying to get rid of all dissent and keep the war going as long as possible, because we know that Hamas likes to cry foul whenever they get slapped around a bit. So it's beneficial for them to continue to get slapped around a bit. And of course, the more Gazan citizens die, the better from Hamas's perspective. Why? Because it makes Israel look bad and it makes people want to turn against them. That's the whole point of this war in the first place. We know that because Hamas admitted it, and we've actually covered it on previous Watchdogs. So you should consider checking those out. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting. That's pretty much all the commentary I have on it. The last thing is there is a debate coming up that I think you guys should be looking forward to. Smash Mouth incrementalism versus abolitionism. Debate between Toby Sumter and Doug Wilson on the Smash Mouth incrementalist side and Jeff Durbin and Bradley Pierce on the abolitionist side is going to be held in Moscow, Idaho, October the 24th, 6 p.m. Again, that is October the 24th, 6 p.m. at 6 p.m. local time, so that's mountain time. And I think a lot of you guys should show up. You can get in-person tickets here. I will provide a link in the description to this debate. Again, it's 6 p.m. October the 24th, so there's plenty of time. You can also join the live streaming it for free on Reformation Red Pill. Let's just read a little bit about this. The problem: Roe v. Wade has been overturned, but abortion numbers are rising across the country. Self-induced abortion remains legal for women in all 50 states. Even many states that claim to have banned abortions are seeing an increase in the number of babies from their state being aborted. The questions: what is the duty of the civil magistrate in relation to abortion? What strategies may Christians use in the fight against abortion? And must Christians seek only the immediate abolition of abortion, or are regulatory measures allowed? In other words, if you pass a bill that is a 6-week ban, is that a good thing or is that injustice? Suppose, for example, you have in a certain legislative session no support for an abolition bill, but a 6-week ban does actually make it to the governor's desk. The governor has a choice to either sign it into law or not sign it into law. If he signs it into law, 6-week ban becomes the law. If he does not sign it into law, then the free libertine use of abortificants and of abortion and all these things continues in his state. What should the governor do in that situation? That's the crux of the question here. Arguing for the Smash Mouth incrementalist side, which is the side that says, yes, we should sign that bill, but we should come back and make it clear that the 6-week ban is not enough. It needs to be completely criminalized. Those will be Pastor Doug Wilson, who's, of course, pastor of Christ Church and founder of Canon Press, Blog and Mayblog, Crenenda Agenda, and I think there's another one, right? Logos, New St. Andrews, etc. Toby Sumter, senior pastor of King's Cross Church in Moscow, and one of the 3 co-hosts of the excellent news program Cross Politic, which I would highly recommend. Those are the 2 who will be arguing for the Smash Mouth incrementalist side. I am a huge fan of both of them, especially Doug, but I watch Cross Politic all the time, and I highly recommend these 2. And I highly recommend at least one of these two. Unfortunately, I don't know a lot about Bradley Pierce, so I can't recommend him, but I'm sure, given the side he's fighting for, I'm sure he's an excellent individual. Jeff Durbin, I love. I love Jeff Durbin's work on this particular matter as it pertains to abortion. I also love a lot of Jeff Durbin's work as it pertains to fighting for presuppositionalism and Calvinism, as it pertains to fighting against some of the cults like Mormonism and so on and so forth, as it pertains to counter-atheist apologetics. Jeff Durbin is an absolutely excellent pastor who, like the previous two, I cannot recommend enough. And if Bradley Pierce is sharing the stage with him, I would assume that Pierce is also an excellent individual. Nevertheless, the two fighting for this side are the two I've mentioned. Jeff Durbin, pastor and elder of Apologia Church, and noted ally of fellow elder at Apologia Church, James White. And Bradley Pierce, who, since I don't know much about, I'll have to just read this description, is president of the Foundation to Abolish Abortion, a constitutional attorney who has drafted more than 24 equal protection bills filed across the country to abolish abortion, and may the Lord bless him in his efforts to do so. We want abortion abolished. All four of these speakers want abortion abolished. The question is, how do we best go about that? And I think this debate is going to be an excellent, excellent debate. I'm hoping to be there myself. I don't know if I will be able to, but I would certainly recommend that you buy your tickets. Not sponsored, but nevertheless, I think it is worth your buy and travel for that matter. All right, friends, that's all we have for today. If you liked this video, please consider liking and sharing this video and consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so. Hit that bell to get notified every time that we go live. Remember to leave any questions, comments, criticisms, concerns, critiques, or anything of that nature in the comment section down below. If you'd like to contribute to the work we do here, please do consider giving either a one-time donation to the PayPal or subscribing to our Patreon for as much or as little as you like. That'll be a monthly donation. We certainly appreciate anybody who is contributing to the work we do here. Also, you can follow us on various social media platforms at the Tag the Synagogue, and there is a link to my book, 15 Questions for Calvinists Answered, in the description down below. This has been CJ Cox with the Watchdog, exclusively on the Synagogue News. Want to remind you guys to think like a Neanderthal, be vigilant, and ask yourselves the question, in the face of Armageddon, will you compromise?